Our epistle lesson is from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 8. This is a bit of a longer scripture reading this morning, so this is a good time, if you haven't before, to get out the Pew Bible and follow along with the reading if you'd like to. You may just like to listen to it being read, but it may help to follow along as we're reading this morning. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and this is on page 172 of the New Testament in the Pew Bible. We want you to know, brothers and sisters, about the grace of God that has been granted to the churches of Macedonia. For during a severe ordeal of affliction, their abundant joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For as I can testify, they voluntarily gave according to their means, and even beyond their means, begging us earnestly for the privilege of sharing in this ministry to the saints. And this, not merely as we expected. They gave themselves first to the Lord, and by the will of God to us, so that we might urge Titus that, as he had already made a beginning, so he should also complete this generous undertaking among you. Now, as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in utmost eagerness, and in our love for you, so we want you to excel also in this generous undertaking. I do not say this as a command, but I am testing the genuineness of your love against the earnestness of others. For you know the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. And in this matter I am giving my advice. It is appropriate for you who began last year not only to do something, but even to desire to do something. Now finish doing it, so that your eagerness may be matched by completing it according to your means. For if the eagerness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. I do not mean that there should be relief for others and pressure on you, but it's a question of fair balance between your present abundance and their need, so that their abundance may be for your need, in order that there may be a fair balance. As it is written, the one who had much did not have too much, and the one who had little did not have too little. But thanks be to God, who put in the heart of Titus the same eagerness for you that I myself have. For he not only accepted our appeal, but since he is more eager than ever, he is going to you of his own accord. With him we are sending the brother who is famous among all the churches for his proclaiming the good news. And not only that, but he has also been appointed by the churches to travel with us while we are administering this generous undertaking for the glory of the Lord himself and to show our goodwill. We intend that no one should blame us about this generous gift that we are administering, for we intend to do what is right not only in the Lord's sight, but also in the sight of others. And with them we are sending our brother, whom we have often tested and found eager in many matters, but who is now more eager than ever because of his great confidence in you. As for Titus, he is my partner and co-worker in your service. As for our brothers, they are messengers of the churches, the glory of Christ. Therefore, openly, before the churches, show them the proof of your love and our reason for boasting about you. The word of the Lord, thanks be to God. Well, as you, I'm sure, know, we are in the middle of our stewardship season, and our focus across all of October has been on this question, how can I keep from giving? And in light of that, I think it's important to introduce to you today our stewardship team. people who have been behind this, the people who hold this before us. You should have some awareness of who's generating this emphasis for us. So, I want you to meet, first of all, Titus. Titus is one of Paul's most trusted co-workers. Titus became a Christian because of Paul's preaching. And after Paul founded a church on the island of Crete, he put Titus in charge there to lead this new church. Titus, you may remember, traveled with Paul to Jerusalem to go meet with the church leaders there and to hammer out these difficult questions of the relationship between Jews and Gentiles and Paul's ministry to the Gentiles. It's important also to know that Titus represents Paul, and often in some pretty tough spots that he has to go into, such as some of these difficult relationships that Paul has with the church at Corinth. And when Paul has to write these letters that sometimes speak forthrightly and maybe even critically about some of the behaviors and the beliefs among the Christians in the church at Corinth, Titus is the trusted lieutenant who carries this message to them and then carries an answer back to Paul. Maybe it was Titus who would say to us, I'm just a messenger. Don't kill the messenger. But in fact, Titus is really more than that. Titus has in fact been in charge of raising funds among the Corinthians for the offering that Paul is trying to collect amongst all the churches for the saints in Jerusalem. And Titus has already been hard at work in this. He's been involved in the pre-planning. He's been involved in the going out and asking for pre-pledges for people. He's behind the kickoff campaign. And we are to welcome Titus into our midst this morning. In fact, we should welcome him because he's been so eagering for this offering to be successful. And we need to remember that he's a person who has the utmost confidence of Paul. So that's somebody we need to acknowledge this morning, Titus. And also, we're told we should welcome into our midst a brother who is a famous preacher. He's a famous preacher among all the churches. He's coming to us to bring us a stewardship message. Because it's always good to have a gifted speaker when you're going to talk about stewardship. Someone who can really, just reach out and pull on those heartstrings and speak directly and persuasively to the needs that we're raising funds for. Some of you may know that in a kind of a series of stewardship materials that circulated for many years, one of the key part of that program was to bring in a special guest preacher for Stewardship Dedication Sunday. And I suppose it was advocated to encourage and generate enthusiasm amongst the congregation, but I also think sometimes it was just to give the congregation a chance to hear from somebody they hadn't already tuned out to when they were talking to stewardship. And I also heartily acknowledge that there may not be that many famous preachers to go around to go to all the churches, because I remember one year when a church in this presbytery called me as stewardship season was approaching and asked if I would come be the guest speaker for their Stewardship Dedication Sunday. They did not say, we need one of the most famous preachers amongst all the churches. They said, we've tried everybody else and you're the only one who might be available. But nevertheless, I agreed to go be the guest speaker at their Stewardship Campaign Dedication Sunday. And to be perfectly honest, I'm sure I didn't say anything that I hadn't already said here at Park Lake before. I left that Sunday, wisely or not, you have to decide, but I left before they announced how much they had raised in their campaign that morning. I didn't want to carry that burden with me throughout the rest of the week. All I know is that after I was the special guest speaker for their Stewardship Dedication Sunday, very shortly after that church voted to leave the denomination. So, you can make of that what you will this morning. But the fact is, we're called to welcome Titus, and along with Titus, this brother who is the famous preacher amongst all the churches, famous for his proclaiming the good news. It's interesting, though, as we introduce him, he's not just a good preacher, he's a good administrator, too. Because Paul says that he doesn't want to be blamed for any impropriety related to this offering. So this brother preacher is going to come and watch over the funds and make sure that everything is on the up and up. As Paul said, we intend to do what's right, not only in the sight of God, but also in the sight of all the churches. And last but not least, I want to introduce to you this morning, along with Titus and this brother who's a famous preacher, we need to also introduce another brother who's a really good person. Paul says he's been tested in a lot of matters, and he's always eager to pitch in and help. This is a good person to have on the team. So we're introducing those three individuals that Paul is sending to generate and to carry forward this offering. They come as Paul's personal representatives. They come as people Paul is sending. And so the message that Paul sends them with is this: openly, before all the churches, show them the proof of your love and our reason for boasting about them. How's that for a stewardship pitch? Show the proof of your love by your giving. How do you react to that? Maybe you're thinking, doesn't sound very Presbyterian, does it? We have other ways of talking about stewardship. We talk about a sense of gratitude and being moved to generosity out of gratitude. Or we talk about responsibility and the need to support the programs that we think are valuable and important to carry out. But Paul sends this message of, I want you to show the proof of your love by your giving. Some folks might be offended by that, maybe even a little put off between what seems to be such a blatant connection between money and faith, as though money were some sort of measurement, or could be some sort of measurement of faith. Sounds to me like the Jerry Maguire movie. Remember that movie starring Tom Cruise, where Jerry Maguire's client was a football player, and he was negotiating a new contract for his client and the team, and the client was always saying to him the phrase they used throughout the movie: "Show me the money, show me the money." It was an indication of how good an agent Jerry was, and also sort of became a measurement of the relationship that they had. But does it sound to you that's kind of what Paul is saying here when he says, show me the proof of your love by your giving? How do you react to that? Here's the thing. Paul doesn't hesitate to make this appeal because he doesn't see any separation between matters of faith on the one hand and practical matters of life on the other. For Paul, there's no separation between this idea of spiritual things versus material or physical things. It all goes together, Paul says. And one lies at the heart of the other, Paul says. In the context of the letters to the Corinthians, we might say, no, Paul, we'd really rather hear you talk about just love itself. So let's read your 13th chapter again. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not boastful, arrogant. Let's focus on that. Or we might say, no, Paul, let's talk about spiritual gifts. And we want to hear how the Spirit has given all of us spiritual gifts. Or some of us might say, Paul, let's read the racy part of your letters again, where you're talking about the behaviors that fellow's doing that he should be told to stop doing. But Paul says, nope. This is, in some ways, the heart of what I'm getting at. And all of what I'm trying to say to you who are Christians at Corinth. Your life of faith shapes and informs and is revealed in the practical, everyday matters of your life together. And your life together and all of the things that involves shows and gives expression to your faith. They both go together. That's why I can say to you, show the proof of your love through your participation in this offering. And we say, Paul, how in the world are you making this connection? How can you say that? And then he immediately ushers us back to the beginning of what he talked about in this chapter, where he says, in effect, this is all a part of God's doing. This is evidence of God's grace at work in your lives. As I send these brothers to appeal to you for you to participate in this offering for the needs of the saints in Jerusalem, what I want you to understand is your participation is going to be caused and affected by the grace of God at work in your lives. And he has an interesting way of pointing that out. He points it out by holding up the example of another church to us. He's going to get into a bit of comparison. He says, look at what the churches in Macedonia are doing. Look at the grace of God that has been at work in their lives. And it's something that we may not have ever put together before, because Paul says, in the midst of their abundant joy and extreme poverty, in the midst of their severe affliction, God's grace has been at work and has brought forth an overflowing, generous response of wealth. How in the world does that work? When God's grace transforms how we look at our lives, when God's grace moves us to take an honest examination of what we have and who we are, when God's grace compels us, invites us, enables us to make important decisions about how our lives will manifest and reflect the wonder and gift of God's grace at work within us. It's strong language that Paul sends with Titus and the other brothers here at church this morning. It's direct language. It's pointed language. It's language that may not always make us comfortable. But it's language, Paul says, that is essential to our understanding of the gospel and to our understanding of who we are. In fact, Paul is saying to the Corinthians, you know, you probably wouldn't even be Christians if it were not for the generosity of faith of the saints in Jerusalem. You're their spiritual children. You Gentiles have been adopted into the faith. And now your realization of that, your understanding of that, your response to that should be displayed in your desire, your eagerness to support them with what you have, to understand and be a part of the needs that they're bearing right now. That's the way the gospel should be working in your lives, Paul said. You should become open to how you are now joined with people whom you were separated from before, but how you are now joined in the gift and wonder of God's grace at work in all of our lives. You should be transformed by that, and you should be showing that as love in what you're doing to respond to their need. It's a pretty powerful and amazing thing, I think, that Paul is saying to the church at Corinth. But we do get experiences of it ourselves from time to time, and our eyes are opened from time to time at the wonder of God's grace at work and the way it calls for us to be changed and transformed and opened to new ways of living ourselves. This past Friday, a number of us from Park Lake went to the 50th anniversary luncheon of the Christian Service Center, held at First Baptist Church in Orlando, in one of their great big fellowship halls, a great big room filled with over 300 people who have been supporting the Christian Service Center across 50 years, important leaders in the community, recognizable names, people who have done wonderful and significant things, all coming together to celebrate this 50th anniversary. They showed a video clip of the history of the Christian Service Center. I think you'd be glad to know this is the kind of thing that Paul would lift up. A picture of Park Lake was included in that video of a church that supported that work across 50 years, as well as other churches. It's kind of a way like Paul saying, I know how much you excel in your generosity. Here, even at this luncheon, our past contributions were being lifted up. But we heard a wonderful presentation by the director of the Christian Service Center, Eric Gray, who spoke with such knowledge and conviction about the needs within the community of Orlando and what we can do to help reduce the suffering of homelessness and poverty. It was a powerful presentation. We heard from other community leaders. We heard from Walter Carpenter, the leader of Pinnell Carpenter Realty Company, who has served as the chairman of the board of trustees. We gathered together with other members who have been on the board across the years. But the climax of the presentation came toward the end when they invited on stage a mother and her daughter. And the mother and daughter who came up were Nieta Coro Boone and her daughter Regina Boone. Nobody really knew who they were. They were not some folks that I knew anything about, but they came forward to tell and share their story. They came forward to talk about how, though they had been married, Jonathan and Nieta, for 25 years, and both had worked full-time hard for many years, even while carrying the burden of medical illnesses. They had done well. They had raised 2 wonderful children. But suddenly they came to a place in life where the ends weren't meeting. And before they knew it, they found themselves being evicted from their home with no place to go. And 2 young adult children trying to make their way through school, now suddenly not knowing where they were going to sleep at night. And they shared their story of how they called the Christian Service Center in great need, and the Christian Service Center responded immediately by helping them to find a hotel room where they were able to stay for 1 week, and then helping them find an apartment where they moved into, and we're now beginning to put the pieces of life back together for them. They both spoke passionately, this mother and daughter. This daughter who is in the honors program now at the University of Central Florida and pursuing a nursing degree. This daughter who is an Elevation Scholar winner, who has been supported by the Elevation group across her years in high school and could speak articulately and persuasively. It was a powerful and moving story, and one that served well to be the climax of the event, because it began to connect us with somebody whose need became an opportunity for us to render assistance and aid and begin to be transformed by the work of this particular agency. But the key point for me happened after the event was over. And I went up to the mother, to Nieta, just to say to her how grateful I was for her speaking at the event, and how wonderful a presentation she had made, and how convicting it was. And she said very aggressively, almost assertively to me, well, you know, it sort of is embarrassing to have to get up and talk about something like this. But for goodness sakes, if I can do anything to help somebody else now, I'm going to take the chance and the opportunity to do it. And it left me thinking as I talked to her that this was a woman who was challenging me to be a little more like her. Not simply someone that I was to see in categories of a person who needed to be helped and for me to fulfill my role as a helper, but now a person who was calling me and challenging me to begin to see the mutuality that we all share between the help and the helper. calling me to remember what Paul called the churches of Corinth to think about in terms of rendering help and assistance to the Jews, to the saints in Jerusalem. That we share this mutual relationship of God's grace and God's goodness at work in our lives. And it's that mutuality, that relationship, which Paul says has to be proved, demonstrated, tested in your acts of love. That's the heart of the gospel, Paul says. The freedom for all of us to know deeply how God's grace is at work in our lives. That's the heart of the gospel, Paul says. The possibility that God's grace can be seen and known and experienced as real. There was a blind beggar sitting on the road to Jericho, calling out, "Jesus, have mercy on me." And the disciples did what they were inclined to do most of the time. "Shut up, be quiet, get out of the way. He didn't have time for you." Until Jesus heard him. And Jesus then sent his disciples to him with a word, "Call him to me." And when they went with his word, did you hear how their tone changed? Take heart. He's calling you. Paul says, prove your love by being agents of Christ's word to everyone, even to yourself. Take heart. He's calling you. Amen.